Love is expensive. Now, I know that society tells us that love doesn't cost. The reality is it absolutely does. Grief is the ultimate price that we pay for love. No matter what we do in life or who we are, we're going to experience loss. The loss of a job, the loss of an opportunity, the loss of a potential future, the loss of a loved one. And that loss is often going to lead us to grief. Grief is that deep, sustained sorrow that sometimes robs us of joy and of time. Grief is exhausting. Grief is unrelenting. Grief is difficult. Grief can also impact your mental health. According to the American Psychiatric Association, some folks develop what's called prolonged grief disorder. PGD is marked by intense grief that disrupts our daily activities. Just think about the pandemic of 2020 and subsequent years. There are people who had multiple losses, not just loved ones, but the loss of friends, the loss of structure, moving from working in the office to now working at home. All of that can result in grief. When you think about this idea of grief, it absolutely impacts you in a number of ways. And maybe you didn't develop prolonged grief disorder, but it absolutely touches us all. I know about grief. I know it from personal experience. Some years ago, I lost my mother-in-law unexpectedly, and the following year, my brother-in-law, her son, died without warning. From there, it looked like the floodgates open. I have lost family members. I've lost aunts. I lost a young nephew to leukemia. I lost 3 cousins in one day. So when I think about this loss, I can tell you from personal experience that it is hard. I can tell you from personal experience that it is difficult. But can I tell you today that there is good in grief? In fact, I want to share 3 ways that you can find the good in grief. Now, let me see by a show of hands, how many of you all have ever gotten a book and rather than reading all the way through it, you went to the end? Anybody besides me? Okay, lots of us. Well, this is what I want you to know about when you read a book. It's important to read the full story. When you read the full story, you get the arc of that story. You feel the tension of the good and the bad, the ebbs and the flows, the highs and the lows. And what I'd like to submit is that that's exactly what happens with grief. You tell its full story, and it can help you as you're dealing with and processing that grief. Now, I remember when my mother called to tell me that she had breast cancer the first time. When she called, the call felt unremarkable at first. It was the end of a long day, and she called and said, "Hey, Matisa, how you doing?" I spoke back to her and said, "Hey, Mom, I'm doing well." She said, "I have something to tell you." "Okay, Mom, what is it?" She says, no complaints, no tears seemingly in her voice. She said, "I have cancer, and I think you're strong enough to take it." Now, what's important about that moment for me is because my mom didn't complain, she was a woman of faith, she was a nurse, she understood her body, I accepted it. It is what it is. She told me that she was going to have surgery and that she would come visit our family and she would stay with us during her recovery. I watched my mom within 2 weeks doing laundry. I watched her get stronger and stronger, and I thought to myself, wow, this woman is made of steel. If you fast forward 10 years, I got a similar call, but it was a very different experience. This time, my mother called me, and she said she had been in a car accident. And she described the accident and said that they had taken her to the hospital by ambulance. And of course, as her daughter, I'm shaken up. I'm wondering what happened to her. And she didn't tell me that she had fractured a bone. She didn't tell me that her arm was in a cast. She said they had done a full-body x-ray. And now she was, not only did she have cancer, but it had metastasized. In other words, it had spread throughout her entire body. Again, my mother was a woman of faith, so it didn't feel like she was shaken, but I could tell she was upended. I could tell that this felt different, and it felt different for me. I decided right then and there that I would believe not only for her sake, but for my sake. Fast forward some months, and my mom dies. How do you deal with that? I can tell you that the months preceding her death, I spent everything taking care of her. I would lay beside her bed. I got anything that she needed. She would call me in the middle of the night. I left my home to go be with her. But after she died, that grief hit me like a ton of bricks. And I will tell you, my grief isolated me. I was around people, and I have an amazing family and an amazing group of friends, but my grief incarcerated me. I was sentenced to solitary confinement. It was as if I was all alone, even when I was in a room full of people. I can remember being with folks and they laughing and smiling and me sort of smiling with them, but going to the bathroom to sob alone. My grief was enveloping me. But the great thing about what happened with that time of isolation is that prison opened up to insulation, and I was no longer able to hide from myself. I had to deal with my feelings. I had to reflect on everything that I was going through. And so my isolation became insulation, and it helped me. My grief gave way to anger. I was so angry that my mother died. Why would she die so young? She was so generous. She housed and clothed the unfed. She loved unconditionally. There are so many other people that could have perhaps taken her place. Why did my mom have to die? I still needed her, even though I was an adult, and I still need her today. I was angry. I was angry that my mom wouldn't see my first TED Talk. I was angry. I was angry that my mother wouldn't see all of her grandchildren live amazing lives. And to be honest, I still get angry. But that's not the full story of my grief. My grief has also become a point of connection. One of the things that I did when my mother passed away is I put the clarion call out on social media. I wanted to speak to anybody whose lives she had touched. I wanted to know funny stories. I wanted to know moments. I wanted to know life lessons because I wanted those things to be part of me. And what I found was that our grief united us. What I found was that I not only was connected to my mother, but I became connected to everybody she impacted. So my grief became an invisible web that tied us all together. My grief is the glue that seals generations. I can remember so vividly when my mother was no longer mobile. Towards the end of her life, one of the things that she loved to do was to get in the car and go see sunrises and sunsets. Particularly as the sun started to set, we would go out and we would look at the beautiful sky, and I can remember her just loving it and remarking on how beautiful the colors were. And we would open the window, and she would breathe in the air as if she was trying to breathe in every morsel of the moment that she could. So you can imagine when my mother passed away, seeing a sunset was a trigger for me. It made me cry. It made me upset. But eventually that gave way to it being a moment of just feeling my mom's presence. I would look at the sunset and I would say, "Thank you, Mom," or "Hi, Mom, how was your day?" I used it as an opportunity to talk to her. Sometimes with my kids in the car, we would stop and we would look at these sunsets, and I would wave or say, "Granny would love that." And the thing that became beautiful is I started discovering pictures in my phone that I had not taken. My daughter started taking pictures of the sunset. And as we would drive, she would say, "Mom, Granny would love this." So my grief became a three-pronged cord between my mother, my daughter, and me. My grief became a bridge between the past and the present, between life and death. What good could you find if you told the full story of grief? There is good in grief. The second way that you can find the good in grief is to give it a voice. When we water plants, we do so that they bear fruit. When we give our grief a voice, we are opening ourselves up to the gifts that grief bears. Now, I want to make sure that we understand this. Grief can come from loss unrelated to death. It can come from a number of different things. It can come from a lost opportunity. It can come from a lost job. There are so many things from which we can grieve. The year that my mother passed away, my family and I transitioned from one state to another. When we transitioned, I left a long-standing career. I was excited about the move, but I thought that I would become a faculty person in this new state. I was a professor, and that's the only thing that I've ever wanted to do in life. I went to school for a long time to do it, long time, and I thought that was the only thing that I would do or could do. So when we went to this other state and no faculty positions opened up, I'll be honest, I was devastated. Not only had I lost my mother, but I lost my identity. I lost a connection with a community that I had cultivated for a number of years. I lost, seemingly, some credibility. I didn't know it at the time, but I was absolutely grieving. I was going through the grieving process. I went through denial. I went through bargaining. I went through anger and eventually got to acceptance. But what I discovered is that when I acknowledged that I was grieving and I gave voice to it, it validated that the experience was hard, but it gave me the opportunity to open myself up to new possibilities. I started looking at myself in a different way. I started reframing my situation. Reframing is a powerful psychological tool that you can use to look at a problem from a different perspective. So as I looked at my situation, I started asking myself some questions. Do you mean that I can only see myself by what I did professionally? Did I really think that all of my education and experience and hard work could only lead me to one career path? Hadn't I taught my students throughout the year that who they were is much, much bigger than what they did? So as I started reframing my own situation, I opened myself up to moving in different directions, and I had the courage to step out into something different. I pivoted. I realized that my skills would transfer, move me beyond one type of position, but I had to give voice to the grief that I was dealing with. And maybe somebody listening right now, maybe you're grieving something other than death. Maybe it's the loss of a job. Maybe it's the loss of an idea. Perhaps you're grieving the dissolution of a marriage. What good could you find if you gave voice to your grief and allowed yourself to move in new and unexpected directions? There is good in grief. The last and final way that you can find the good in grief is to choose gratitude. Loss is compulsory, it's inevitable, but gratitude is a choice. When you lean into gratitude, you can take the sting out of loss. As life would have it, death again visited my family. This time it was in the person of my baby brother. The sibling that I loved. I love all of them, but I loved especially this brother. He died unexpectedly, and like my mother, I spent his last days with him. I sang to him, prayed over him, I spoke to him, and when he could no longer speak for himself, I became his voice. So his transition, his death was especially hard. I spent those last days making sure that his medical care was taken care of, making sure that my father was good. So when he died again, here I am experiencing grief. What I've learned is that no matter the loss or how many losses you experience, all of them are unique. What was unique about this particular loss is that my brother was the victim of his own choices. My brother was a drug addict. And part of his medical issue had to do with his years of drug abuse. So now I'm grieving, and I'm asking myself, what could I have done? I'm grieving, and I'm wondering who is to blame. I'm grieving, and I'm angry again in the choices that he made. So how do you find the good in this? I don't have all of the answers, but what I do know is that grief is a powerful friend in the face of immeasurable loss. That gratitude, rather, is a powerful friend in the face of immeasurable loss and grief. And I chose and choose gratitude. I created what I call my grief and gratitude journal. And in this journal, on one side, I write down everything that I'm grieving. I write down my sadness, my pain, all of the issues that I'm having. But on the other side, I write down everything that I'm grateful for. I'm grateful, for example, that my brother allowed me to teach him to tie his shoes and to ride a bike when he was 4. I'm grateful that when we were little and I was watching him outside of the public library and he got hit by a car, he never blamed me. Now, I always told him, I did tell him to look both ways before crossing. So I'm grateful that he always made me feel valued and loved and validated. I am so grateful that I got the chance and the joy of being his big sister. You see, gratitude, what I call radical gratitude, gives us the opportunity to have gratitude while we grieve. It gives us the chance to laugh through our tears. It's given me the impetus to take the memories of and with my brother and to keep them close. Those memories have held me up. Those memories hold me up. What good could you find if you chose gratitude in the midst of your grieving? What if grief is not just good, but it's a gift? It's given me the impotence of finding out who is important and what is important. It's given others the opportunity to grow and to carry out the legacy of their loved one. What can grief give you? Thank you.